Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect to my friend from Utah, and he is my friend, I'm getting concerned by hearing a number of people being critical of gun advocates, gun control advocates for speaking out. It's almost a case of blaming the victims and not blaming the person who's able to walk in and buy a weapon that should be used on a war zone, not in a school zone. The kind of weapons that are being used by the Russians in Ukraine have no place in a school. It's not the time to blame the victims. It's time to blame those who sell weapons of war this way. And if I seem outrageous because gun violence continues to plague the country. As the senators from Connecticut pointed out, nearly 10 years ago, 20 children, 6 adults were slaughtered at Sandy Hook Elementary. This committee under my chairmanship advanced common sense legislation to address shortcomings in our gun policy. But what happened yesterday? 19 elementary school children, 2 teachers gunned down in their Texas school by a teenager. Nothing has changed. Nothing except more lives lost. When my Republican colleagues goes on television, the answer to this is to arm the elementary school teachers. When my children, my grandchildren have been in elementary school, I expect the teachers to be teaching, not carrying guns. So we get empty thoughts and prayers and, isn't it awful? Well, let's start doing something. Let's stand up as senators, both parties, and actually vote for real restrictions on guns. We're the only civilized nation on earth that watches our citizens, our children gunned down, and we do nothing to prevent it from happening again. We're cowards if we don't act. Cowards. Now, Mr. Dettelbach, it is good to see you again. As a former staff member of mine on this committee, I know your integrity, your honesty, how you worked with both Republicans and Democrats on this committee. Now, maybe you feel a little bit different sitting at the nominees table, but I congratulate you on your nomination. You served from 2009 to 2016 as U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. You spent 2 decades as a prosecutor. I think it's critically important that the ATF have a permanent director who can enforce our nation's gun laws. You're a career prosecutor. You could do that. In fact, I'd like to ask you one question. I've heard this from police officers and law enforcement, not only in my own state, but all over. There is an issue plaguing the ATF's National Tracing Center in West Virginia. The NTC is our country's only crime gun tracing facility. That means whenever a gun is found at a crime scene, law enforcement need to find the gun's last known owner. They submit a trace request to the National Tracing Center because that might trace down who some of the suspects or traffickers could be. But because of a misguided, I'd say stupid restriction imposed by Congress, the ATF is currently unable to electronically search the tens of millions of gun sale records currently in its possession. People should go and look at the warehouses full of paper records. My God, in 2022, ATF employees are forced to conduct these record searches by hand. The restriction on electronic search of these records, stupidly rooted in an irrational fear that leads to a National Registry of Firearms, has real-world implications for our law enforcement agents who need to quickly trace crime laws. I believe the Congress has to act to bring the ATF into the 21st century. Let it do what everybody else can do, electronically search crime gun records in their possession. And I reintroduced the Crime Gun Tracing Modernization Act last year with Congressman Pasquale, and I thank Senators Whitehouse and Feinstein and Gillibrand for joining as co-sponsors. Are you familiar with this issue I'm talking about with the paper records?
Senator, I'm generally familiar with it. Not having been at the ATF, I'm not as specifically familiar with it, but generally I am, yes.
Well, would you do tonight? Let me ask you this question. As someone who's been in law enforcement, do you believe that allowing ATF to electronically search crime gun records would aid the efforts of law enforcement?
Senator, as somebody who has been in law enforcement, having the ability to quickly, what the ATF does is they follow the firearm is an important thing for law enforcement. And I would tell you that whether under present tools or whether if Congress decides, if you decide, because that's your decision, not mine, I will use whatever tools that Congress gives me, and I'll always stay within the law to do our best to try and support state and local law enforcement to try and catch shooters.
Well, Chair Durbin, I'll close with this, mentioned a firearm used to tragic results bought through a straw purchaser. Chair Durbin and I and Senator Collins have reintroduced our legislation to stop these kinds of straw purchases. Do you agree that legislation making these kind of acts illegal in federal law might help?
Senator, again, I'm hopefully, if I'm privileged to be confirmed as AD Director, my job will be to do what Congress tells me to do. And I will use whatever tools you give me to do my best to enforce the laws as they are on the books. And I don't come to this position with a specific policy agenda, but I do know that people who straw purchase, it is a serious matter under current law, and whatever tools I'm given, I'll do my best to use them impartially but effectively to enforce the law.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Senator Grassley?